December 26, 1944. The Surchio Valley, northern Italy. A mountain village named Somocolonia sits under a lid of winter cloud, its stone walls sweating cold. Snow has been trampled into a gray paste by boots, mule hooves, and the frantic dragging of ammunition crates. Somewhere below the ridge, a river threads through darkness like a strip of torn metal. And above it all, before daylight fully arrives, the first blunt impacts of German shells begin to land, each explosion briefly turning the fog into a lit-up bruise, then swallowing it again. Inside a battered house on the second floor, a single American officer braces himself near a window. The glass is gone. The air that pours in is sharp and wet, smelling of smoke, pine, and the sour bite of explosives. He does not watch the valley the way a traveler would. He watches it the way an instrument watches a target, measuring distance, reading movement, translating shapes into coordinates. This is First Lieutenant John R. Fox, serving as a forward observer. And in the next hours, as German infantry closes in around him, he will ask American guns to strike the place where he stands, because in his judgment, the life of the line depends on one final correction. This moment matters because it is not only a story of battlefield sacrifice, it is also a story of contradiction, of an American army fighting for democracy abroad while still segregated at home, of a black officer trained to calculate angles and grids, forced to calculate something far heavier, whose lives will be purchased by his own. Fox's decision came during a German offensive in the winter of 1944, when the Italian front, often overshadowed by Normandy and the Ardennes, was still consuming men in brutal, incremental fighting through mountains and villages. The Surchio Valley sector was a hard place to hold, and a hard place to explain, even to the soldiers living in it. It was cold enough to make metal bite skin, wet enough to rot fabric, and narrow enough that enemy movements could feel like a tightening rope. In late 1944, the 92nd Infantry Division, the Buffalo Soldiers, a segregated African-American division, had been deployed to Italy. It was the only African-American infantry division to serve in combat in Europe during World War II, and its presence carried a double weight: to fight Germany and to fight the assumptions of its own institution. John Fox's path into this war had already been shaped by that reality. Born in Cincinnati in 1915, he pursued officer training through ROTC at Wilberforce University, earning a commission and entering an army that limited black soldiers' roles and doubted black officers' leadership. Yet he became precisely what the army needed at the front: a trained observer, a man who could stand forward of friendly guns and convert chaos into firing data. By December 1944, the 92nd had reached the Surchio River Valley near Somocolonia. The front there had a deceptive stillness, positions occupied for some weeks, as later official records would phrase it. But winter in Italy did not mean rest. It meant the ground froze, the roads failed, and the Germans watched for weakness. Christmas came, and in the Surchio Valley, Christmas was not a truce. It was a thin pause in which men tried to warm their hands and remember the idea of home. The symbolic object that will return again and again in this story is not a weapon in Fox's hands, but a small American ration tin, an ordinary can in a world of extraordinary violence. In the American Army, food arrived in standardized containers. Calories were measured, packaged, stacked, moved by a logistics system so vast it often felt invisible. To a soldier freezing in a stone village, that small can, beans, meat, fruit, coffee, could feel like proof that somewhere behind the line there was order, industry, and a belief that the individual mattered enough to be fed. The tin is not glamorous. It is blunt, practical, democratic.
And in a war where ideology claimed men like property, the simple fact of being supplied could become a quiet argument for what America said it was. But what the soldiers expected, what many Americans expected, and what many Germans expected, was that such a system could simply roll forward, overwhelming resistance by sheer material weight. The myth was that American abundance would make the war less intimate, more machines, fewer sacrifices, more production, less personal cost. For the 92nd Infantry Division, another expectation hovered closer and crueler, that if they faltered, it would be used as evidence that they should never have been there, and if they succeeded, it would be minimized, delayed, or forgotten. Their war was fought not only against German units, but against the fragile reputation granted to them by a segregated chain of command.
And for the Germans who moved against Somocolonia, there were expectations too. German formations, experienced and deliberate, had spent years watching Allied habits. They knew that artillery observers were valuable. They knew that Americans would withdraw if flanked and hammered. And they understood something else. A segregated enemy could be psychologically pressured. Some accounts describe that the German offensive in this sector targeted the newly arrived 92nd. Whether or not every German soldier understood the racial politics of the U.S. Army, the German command understood the military value of striking a unit still proving itself. The night of Christmas brought the kind of warfare that does not announce itself with banners. Later official citations record a gradual influx of enemy soldiers in civilian clothes, and by early morning the town was largely in enemy hands. Then, around 0400 hours on December 26th, an organized attack by uniformed German formations began. It started with heavy shelling, everything the Germans had, and the American infantry, greatly outnumbered, began to withdraw from the town. Here, the story narrows into a single building, a single room, a single set of decisions. Fox and members of his observer party remained behind on the second floor of a house, directing defensive fires. This was not romantic. This was procedure pushed into extremity. A forward observer's job is to see what the guns cannot see and to correct fire until steel meets target. In calm conditions, it is technical. Under assault, it becomes spiritual arithmetic. How close can you bring the barrage before you erase yourself? At 0800 hours, Fox reported that Germans were in the streets and attacking in strength. He called for artillery fire increasingly close to his position. At one point, he told his battalion commander words that survive in official records like a flare. "That was just where I wanted it. Bring it in 60 yards." His commander protested that the barrage would be too close. Fox insisted. The distance was cut in half. The German pressure continued, large numbers moving forward, surrounding the position. In that tightening circle, the emotional contrast becomes sharp. Soldiers are trained to believe in survivability, cover, withdrawal routes, the possibility of reinforcement. Even when men accept that they may die, they are rarely trained to request the instrument of their own death from their own side. Yet Fox's transmissions show no drift into chaos. They show intention. He was not asking for a dramatic gesture. He was asking for a measured solution to a tactical disaster. The Americans who had withdrawn needed time to regroup. Civilians in and around the village needed time to escape, and the only force capable of ripping open a path through superior numbers was the distant weight of American guns. The last exchange, recorded in multiple official and institutional summaries, condenses the entire moral weight of the moment. His commander warned him, "Fox, that will be on you." Fox acknowledged the danger and replied, "Fire it. There's more of them than there are of us. Give them hell."
In that sentence is a collision of worlds. "There's more of them than there are of us" is not poetry, it is a statement of fact, a calculation. But "give them hell" is something else, not hatred, not spectacle, but a final insistence that the enemy will not simply take the ground because he arrives in greater number. Fox's request transformed American artillery, normally a shield thrown outward, into a wall dropped straight down. The shells came in. Fox and his party were killed. The barrage inflicted heavy casualties and delayed the German attack long enough for U.S. units to reorganize and stabilize the line. When Allied forces retook the area, Fox's body was found near the position, alongside the bodies of enemy soldiers. The image is stark, almost biblical in its stillness, one man's coordinates made into a grave marker for both sides. But the deeper wound was not only what happened in the house, it was what happened afterward. Fox did not receive immediate recognition equal to the magnitude of his act. For decades, his story lived in fragments, within veterans' memory, within local remembrance, within paperwork that did not move quickly through the channels of honor. He was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Cross in 1982, and then, after a Department of Defense review into why no African-American soldiers had received the Medal of Honor in World War II, Fox was among 7 black veterans whose awards were upgraded. On January 13, 1997, President Bill Clinton presented Fox's Medal of Honor to his widow, Arlene. That timeline, 1944 to 1997, is part of the story's transformation. Fox's final act was not only a battlefield decision, it became evidence in a long argument about who was seen, who was believed, and who was allowed to embody American ideals. In the moment of the barrage, Fox fought for lives behind him. In the decades after, his delayed recognition exposed the distance between America's promise and its practice. The transformation is not sentimental, it is historical. The recurring ration tin returns here too, not as a prop, but as a symbol of what America could do when it chose to act at scale. The same country that could ship millions of meals, shells, rifles, and trucks across an ocean could also, eventually, correct its own record, slowly, imperfectly, but publicly. The tin is abundance made portable. The Medal of Honor, awarded half a century late, is conscience made visible. Neither changes the past, but both testify that systems, logistical and moral, can be built, neglected, and rebuilt. And what of the German soldiers in this story? What did they expect, and what did they encounter? They expected a town breaking under shell fire, an enemy retreating in disorder, a quick exploitation of weakness. They expected a forward observer to vanish with the withdrawing infantry. They did not expect an American officer to stay behind inside a doomed house and keep correcting fire until the guns were practically touching him. They did not expect American artillery to land where an American voice was still speaking. Fox's transformation, too, is worth naming carefully. He entered an army that restricted him because of his race. He fought in a division whose competence was doubted by its own institution. Yet in the decisive hour, he was not fighting to prove a point to history. He was doing the job as trained, observing, correcting, refusing to let the enemy turn movement into massacre. In the end, the battlefield itself does not speak in speeches. It speaks in after-effects. A village is retaken. A line is stabilized. Survivors live with the knowledge that they did not die because someone else chose to. Paperwork catches up years later. A widow receives a medal in a bright ceremonial room far from the Surquillo Valley's wet cold. And somewhere in the invisible background, the small ration tin remains what it always was, a quiet piece of American industry, stamped and sealed, promising that even in ruin, something organized and human will arrive. So the epilogue returns to that first morning, fog, stone, and the distant guns. Freedom is often discussed as if it is an abstract principle, but in war, freedom becomes physical. It becomes the right to retreat without being slaughtered, the right of civilians to slip away from an occupied street before the enemy closes the net, the right of a soldier, segregated, doubted, and still obligated, to make a decision that serves others rather than the self. And abundance, the American kind, the industrial kind, does not only mean more food, more shells, more vehicles. It means the capacity to support choice. It means the ability to place overwhelming fire exactly where one voice, in one ruined house, says it must go. It means a system that can be used not only to conquer, but to protect, and, decades later, to correct its own memory. In Somocolonia, the artillery came down like a verdict. The ration tin, somewhere in a pocket or a satchel, remained closed and ordinary, untouched by ceremony. Yet both belong to the same truth, that democracy is not proven by how loudly it declares itself, but by what it sustains, by the lives it feeds, the sacrifices it remembers, and the willingness, however late, to name courage without condition.